Welcome. I hope you can all hear us okay. So today we're going to be talking about the intersection of defense and climate. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, we are currently seeing an unprecedented rise in defense spending around the world. This has been rising for the last 10 years. I think more than 100 countries increase their defense spending in 2024 at the same time that we're seeing the real-life impact of climate change happening all around. So just to kick us off, I would like to speak to you, Heidi, about how we should maybe redefine what defense means when we're also talking about climate and how I can make this happen.
Yes, so it's a really interesting question because I think climate and defense are both kind of umbrella terms and they're very, very wide. And I think when people talk about defense, for example, they often mean very different things. And I think there's some of defense and climate is overlapping. And that is essentially the bit which is what I call climate resilience. And that's resilience of our food supply and our water, energy resilience, and really just making sure that we can live securely and have good societies. But then, of course, there's another side of defense, which is more weapons and military and also offensive tech, like also tech actually used to invade other countries, etc. And a lot of times that is also getting a lot of funding and sometimes a lot more funding than climate tech is, which to me is a pretty big concern because I feel like that is essentially short-term thinking because, you know, we can essentially keep invading more countries because we want oil, or we can keep invading more countries because we want food and water security. But we could also really think long-term and think about how can we use more budget to try to make our own countries more resilient and try to fix those issues, so which otherwise would lead to further wars and conflicts. So to me, you know, climate tech includes climate resilience, which is already a form of defense, and we don't necessarily need so much of the defense offensive tech, essentially, which I'm a little bit more against.
Thank you. And I want to go to John to continue with that. And I apologize, I didn't get you to introduce yourselves beforehand. But John, so your work is in energy resilience and making clean energy stable and building on that as a form of defense. I want to ask you the same question, I suppose, which is, how is it that we can ensure that we are building on clean energy and creating the best possible outlook for climate change, but also protect ourselves in that scenario?
That scenario being hostile invasion.
Yes, that scenario.
So I think it comes down to similar things that Heidi sort of said, and I think Carl Sagan said it already decades ago, sort of, how do we prepare ourselves against catastrophes? Because all these things, I mean, you could add pandemics, solar storms, there's sort of things that would be catastrophic to society as we know it. And the question is then, how do we protect ourselves against those catastrophes, reducing their sort of implications? And to some degree, they go hand in hand. So building energy resilience is also a form of deterrence, making it harder to occupy or invade another country. And at the same time, we can't neglect defense spending and having offensive capabilities, because that's also a way of deterrence. On the other hand of that is that climate crisis will come with immense migration flows and a lot of geopolitical uncertainties as some places become inhabitable. And that will impact how geopolitics are played out and the need for us to protect ourselves defensively against potential threats. So they're very much interlinked. And we can't do one or the other, but we do have a finite amount of financial resources, capabilities, and stuff to deploy. I think we just need to have a rational dialogue about where are we spending those. And I mean, the word of the month, I guess, is dual capabilities. How can we build in both? And how can we think about resilience in a holistic perspective? I think I mean, I think everywhere I go nowadays, people talk about resilience, and I think it's a good thing. But what that's sort of fundamentally, when you apply that to a business or a society, is that you need to revisit sort of all the decisions you made, all the trajectories you've gone through, and just so slightly adjust them to the new realities, because the new realities have changed. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's an answer to your question, but something to think about.
No, it is. Thank you. Now, Christian, as a panelist, you have invested in defense tech, which is obviously different to these guys who are climate tech. And I think often when the conversation comes around defense and climate, it's that defense spending or defense innovation will go green when it works. It's not the priority to make the defense tech green, it seems the matter. How do you kind of respond to calls from those that want climate to be the #1 priority when building things to protect the Earth?
Well, in the U.S., which is where I'm from and speaking from, the word climate is not a priority, and it certainly is not with the current administration. But the change in narrative around resilient infrastructure is really important and agrees with both parties. And while my perspective is I'm not investing in a solution because it's the most climate friendly, I'm investing based off what the government needs, and oftentimes the best defense capability is also the most climate-friendly capability, and so, and a lot of the climate innovations stem out of the defense R&D labs. Nuclear energy comes from defense R&D labs, solar power, all of this stuff, as well as, biofuels, which is really quite crucial for obviously it's amazing for climate, but it also is really crucial for defense with, producing your own green fuel on base or wherever you are, which is, helps significantly with logistics in a war zone, which obviously is quite challenging, but it's so much safer for the human body. You're not breathing in all these toxic things that can kill you, within contact, as well as bringing in, if air gets into that oil pipeline or whatever it is and explodes your full base, that's obviously slightly problematic, and you don't quite have that issue when it comes to green fuels. So, and another one of my, my portfolio companies is building fully off-grid hydrogen-powered data centers. While it's amazing for climate and no emissions and no need for outside water, I'm investing because that is what the Pentagon needs. That is the best solution for the Pentagon, but it just so happens to be the most climate friendly.
I think it's very interesting to me, you saying about climate as a buzzword and the change in that. So essentially what you're saying is that climate is a priority, but it's not being branded as climate in those conversations.
Exactly.
And I just want to come to you, Heidi, because I know we spoke about this earlier today, about how climate was a major focus of a lot of startups, a lot of innovation. Everybody was about climate tech, and that has shifted. Could you tell me more about that and why that is, and what climate conversations look like now if they're not directly about climate?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing because we started our fund in 2020. And just after that, climate tech within the VC space became like the buzzword, right? It was climate in 2021, it was growing faster than AI had at the time. It really was the hype, and everyone wanted to invest in climate, and all the startups were starting climate tech startups. And in both in Europe and US at the time, there was a lot of excitement, and a lot of money went into climate tech. Now, since then, like in the past years, we've obviously seen a dip, and this year everyone started questioning, like, is climate tech dead? Like, is this the same as what happened in the clean tech bubble, where essentially we weren't able to return the money and no one should put money into it? And honestly, there is a little bit of, I think there's a little bit of truth to that, in the sense that it was so hyped that all of these solutions that actually didn't fit into the climate tech VC investment space still got funded, and a lot of those were never really VC fundable. They didn't fit into the framework that VCs invest from and should maybe never have had VC money. And now people are saying, okay, they're crashing, they're not returning money, and we should not put more money into climate. So I actually think that from the kind of VC space, some mistakes were definitely made in terms of climate tech being so hyped. But if we think about it, the problems that we have and we're trying to solve are still there. We still don't have energy resilience. We're still not reducing emissions, right? We're still heading in the same trajectory where the planet is going to be too warm for humanity to be able to thrive. So all of that is the same. And that means the urgency is the same. And people are going to have to put money into the solutions to actually solve them. But the difference is, so the conversation is that what can VCs do? Like what is actually climate tech that VCs can do? And that is often the resilience part. That is often the climate tech resilience part that overlaps with defense, in my opinion. And that's what we should put more money into. So that bit has actually stayed there. The problem has been the same. The kind of climate resilient and what's being funded, they're still there. It's just that we've kind of shifted a little bit with the narrative. Like first it was climate tech, now we're kind of calling it resilience, now we're kind of going to shifting to calling it defense tech and some of defense tech. And I feel like it is a little bit silly because it is just a narrative, but I mean, the needs are the same. The technologies are still needed. And honestly, as a VC fund, I feel like we're kind of just going with, whatever people want to call it, as long as we're solving the biggest problems that humanity is facing, because we're really trying to save humanity here.
Yeah, I want to come to you, John, with this, because I wondered if you experienced the same things working at Flower. And I think it's very interesting when something becomes the topical thing to invest in at the moment. And I wanted to ask you, how can we keep people still interested in green investment? How can we keep them on track with green investments when other things seem to be taking priority, or there are quicker wins to pick up, or there's a new flavor of the month, so to speak? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, first I can just echo what Heidi said as well. Like, there's a flavor of the month. I mean, and we started also back in 2020. Then we called it more like climate, or how do we like make sustainability focused. Then in 2022, the energy crisis came. Then we were sort of solving energy sovereignty and tackling those crises. Then AI came, and I mean, some actual feedback I got was like, you should have more AI on your deck. And now I think it's come to the point where AI is taking up a lot of space relative to other things, like climate tech back in 2020, and that's fine, we go through those cycles. But in order to position sort of climate solutions, I mean, the path we've gone down, because you need to sell a narrative that sort of the market sort of buys into, and that narrative right now is that we are the cheapest solution. Like, this is the best way to go. It's also good for the climate, but you need to sell something else, and right now that's cost competitiveness. So I think that's the narrative I think we are sort of pushing right now more than back then, although we're selling exactly the same product. We haven't changed during these sort of 5 years in that sense, but our story has of course been adapted to where the market climate is and what people are looking for. But I think that's just natural, and I think that's a part of also running a business, is sort of being aware of your environment you're operating in, and you need to sort of position yourself within that space in a good way.
I think there's an important point to make in that it's not defense is the new flavor of the month. I mean, the war in Ukraine really kind of made everyone realize, like, we need to really upgrade our defenses and technologies. And, so it didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was actually a global event making us realize that we need to really focus in on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. And I think when you look at something like Ukraine, of course, it highlights all the insecurities that are happening in a place. Like, I think the Ukraine war has significantly shown Europe where there's insecurity with food or with energy. And I guess as well, like in terms of the kind of the investments that you take forward from that, I suppose, Heidi, as the kind of Europe-based and the work that you do and the startups and things that you work with, is this something that you think is on people's mind efficiently going forward, or how is this shaping the work that you do?
It's definitely more in people's minds, and honestly, also we invest in Europe and US. However, it is strange sitting in Europe and actually seeing a lot what's happening politically, and also trying to understand that are we going to be able to use the climate technologies that we are funding in the US, for example? Are they going to reach us? Should we think more about European resilience and European security? Like, should we think differently based on where we are? So I think we are, at least as a fund, having a lot more of those type of conversations about how do the technologies that we back actually impact society and each of our countries and our continents, etc., and how do current kind of geopolitical tensions change the needs that we have. It is definitely a conversation we did not have as much when we started in like 2019, 2020 to what we are having today.
Yeah, I think from that perspective as well, in the terms of kind of trying to build that resilience, it seems that a lot of countries are looking to turn inwards with everything. They want all of their resources to come from those close by. It's very difficult to sustain or to examine global supply chains in that way. I wondered if you wanted to talk about this a bit, John, in terms of countries can't do the green transition securely on their own. Do you think that there has to be partnership in building clean energy and security?
Yeah, I think fundamentally I think what at least, maybe not the Americans, but the Europeans has sort of woken up to is that geopolitics have become transactional. And that has had quite massive implications on how we see the world, because before we've seen it as sort of we're spreading our ideology, liberal sort of market economies across the globe. It's just taking everyone a little bit time to catch up. I think now we sort of stopped and said, is that actually the case? And where should we draw the lines? Like, who should we let into this ideology? Are we safe allowing sort of Hungary into that, or should we exclude them? Like, and that's the sort of path we're sort of walking down right now and trying to realize, okay, who do we actually trust in the world where we have the same foundational ideology? And the rest we need to start treating transactionally as well. And then it comes to your question is how do we build relationships? Because we built an interconnected world with global supply chains, China dominating sort of renewables, batteries, solar, more and more wind as well. Are we still willing to trade with them? I mean, on the basis that the world is still transactional, we should find transactional relationships where we feel confident doing that. At the same time, I think we should more seriously consider, as Europe, how do we build up these capabilities ourselves? Can we? And I mean, I think that goes both directions. Like, should we build our own GPS system, or should we rely on the Americans? Should we build our own battery facilities, or should we rely on Chinese? Like, and ultimately, that's a political question, and we're just market players, sort of abiding by the rules. But I think that sort of starkly changed, and I think I've seen that both with investors and in the boardroom and other stakeholders, is where do we draw the line? When we build a battery system, we have active and passive components. Is that are the passive components actually passive, and can they be Chinese? Can active components be Chinese or not? And I mean, that's also in that transactional relationship, that's an open dialogue that we have with our Chinese suppliers. It's like, we can't trust you. And they're like, we know you can't trust us. But we like each other, but geopolitically we can't trust each other. So I don't think we can build a clean energy system today without relying on global supply chains. I think so we shouldn't stop due to that. But the question is, what should we invest in, and what capabilities do we need to ensure that we have within Europe, so that we can sort of reliably build the energy transition regardless of what happens in the transactional world.
Thank you, that was well put. I wanted to come to you, Christian, about a similar topic from a US perspective, what your thoughts are on what John had to say.
Perspective on collaboration?
Yeah, in perspective on building clean energy and pushing forward with sustainability from an independent status compared to having to interact with others.
I am very much a big advocate for collaboration between countries, obviously. It's amazing for everybody, but when it comes to energy security, it's really important. Obviously, China's, I think, the largest manufacturer of solar panels, and they have their chips in a lot of our energy infrastructure in the U.S., which is extremely dangerous from a national security standpoint, and something that I know a lot of the current government officials are working on trying to reverse. So probably not the greatest idea to buy it from them and integrate it that closely to our national security. So there's some things where you really do need to develop within the country, share it and build it with our European allies, obviously. But yeah,
Yes. You spoke earlier about how defense innovation is often climate friendly and does often complement the desire to just transition and to make a clean transition. Could you share with me a bit more about ways that you've uncovered in your work, and especially with the work that you're doing in space tech at the moment, and how that could impact our future of climate change activity?
Yes, absolutely. First, I wanted to kind of share climate and defense have always been really linked forever. I mean, the winner of many wars for the last thousands of years have been based off who had the advantage on the weather. Who knew how to fight through the snowstorm and be resilient through that. And one of my personal friends was a Marine in Afghanistan serving, and he had his entire battalion blown up with mines from, I believe it was the Taliban, and he was going deeper into finding out what the reason was, and sat down with the actual terrorists who tried to blow up, who did blow up his whole battalion besides his jeep, and killed his teammates. And the reason for that was because his family's farm was severely impacted by climate, and he didn't really have an option besides to go and join the Taliban for food and security for his family, which then led to his teammates obviously dying. And so there's a huge linkage here. So we certainly need to focus on the planet, and by doing so, I think sharing similar stories to that and create a narrative that not politicizing climate and sustainability investments, because that will increase the defense budget, increase wars and all kinds of different things. When you come to extract, invading other countries for extracting their minerals and resources because yours might be polluted or whatever it might be. I think that's a really important topic. When it comes to the space work that you mentioned, so Andromeda Ventures is founded alongside some incredible senior government officials within the aerospace and defense community. And one of the key focuses that we are working on is solving for the 187 technology shortfalls that NASA and our allies have with the Artemis Accords. And a big part of that is energy. No dinosaurs were on the moon to be able to have oil to fuel all these things. So you need climate and climate-friendly energy sources to be able to make that happen, which directly apply here on Earth today. So I think it's a great opportunity for the U.S. and our allies as a mission on where to go towards. We're building this for space infrastructure, but it applies here on Earth. But we're not calling it climate. It's just that's the option that we need for the moon. It's not political, but it obviously helps the climate here a lot.
Yeah, it has a climate-friendly side part
Right.
to it.
And the other thing too is, we've seen a little bit on how climate and the increase in natural disasters significantly impacts our military bases. When hurricanes come through and naval bases are flooding and all of this stuff. So it really is, it's not an option, or it's not a luxury to invest in these climate solutions. It's mandatory for national security.
Thank you. Yeah. I wanted to come back a little bit to talking about how obviously interlinked climate and defense are, and the ways, I suppose in that example that you gave as well, like in how climate can drive people to be involved in conflict, but that also, as much as we can also have countries that invade other countries for climate reasons. And I guess in terms of where we are at the moment with climate change and where we want to be, how do we tackle that as part of the defense conversation, the climate and the defense conversation? Heidi, would you like to weigh in?
Kind of coming back to my early point, I think we're still separating these too much, where we're not really thinking long term enough. You know, if we really would focus on making this planet, this pale blue dot that we're living on right now, livable, if we really focused on, you know, our energy needs, our food, our water resilience, then we wouldn't have to think so much about defense in the long term. There's this strange thing that, you know, what are we actually going to defend once humanity is actually not able to thrive on this planet? And I think that it's there's a very strange prioritization here where we're kind of saying that, okay, if we focus more on different defense technologies, then it will have some links to climate, which is the kind of looming thing that we should be focusing on. So it's very scary to me that this is kind of where we come to, and that people aren't really realizing it and thinking that maybe it's like a subproduct of what we invest in, or what we should be focusing on, and instead of really figuring out, like, you know, how could we all live on this planet? We have a really beautiful planet. There's a lot of potential here. We just need to work on it.
Yeah, I think we are going to have some questions soon if people want to submit them, but I wanted to build on that, and I guess this question is for whoever would like to weigh into it, but I will perhaps start with you, John. Where do you think the conversation around defense and climate is going? Like, in answer to this question of this panel, which is it a question mark, or are we saying that they're definitely interlinked? And then if so, how do we integrate this into every conversation going forward? How do we ensure that both of these things are walking together hand in hand?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, they obviously overlap is between energy, because energy is both a security question and a climate question at once. So they're extremely strongly connected. I mean, everything from permitting, the military typically is very involved, but also to what type of power resources do we want and where do we want them. So in energy, I think it's quite sort of interlinked already, where we discuss this. I think when it comes to the sort of long-term perspective, Heidi sort of talked about as well, I think that's where we're sort of losing the connection, in that, like, we're not meeting our climate targets. I don't think anyone credibly could claim that, and we're going to overshoot the targets we set in the Paris Agreement, and the world is going to get a lot hotter, and that's going to follow with a lot of chaos and, like, migration, and I think that's a fact. Like, if you just look at that, that's a fact. The world is going to be a little bit chaotic. We have a chance to influence that in how much chaotic it's going to be. And that's, of course, it's going to impact defense and uncertainties in the world. So they are interlinked in that long-term perspective. But we can't do, again, we need to do both.
Thank you. We do have some questions in, and I'm going to start with one of the more broader ones, but my favorite one that I've seen. Is it possible to solve our climate crisis while clinging on to perceptions of nations rather than embracing a humanity-wide approach to existential problems? Would anybody in particular like to answer that?
I can take that from an energy perspective, where I think we're actually missing the mark a little bit. So in Europe, especially when the energy crisis came, but also when the pandemic came, all of a sudden we were really union. We were a lot of different nations with borders. So in the energy space, it's about how do electricity prices influence each other's. So how does Swedish prices being influenced by German prices and so on? And that becomes very rapidly a nationalistic question where we say like, okay, we want to maintain low power prices in Sweden, so we don't want to increase our export capabilities to Germany. So from a typical economic perspective, exporting something because the prices are good is a good thing. But it's so politically influenced, the power prices and energy prices, that we optimize for something that's really short term. In the long term perspective, we want to build an industrial base in Sweden where we export power, but we also want Germany to thrive. It's our biggest export market and a strong trading partner. If we can build more power capacity in Sweden and export that, that's a good thing. But that short-term sort of perspective fails to bring the bigger picture solutions. So I think to some degree, I think like we can't. We need to think more holistically, but then there's the counter sort of power to that, which is we're also going to end up in conflict. So we need to sort of, coming back to that, decide which sort of sphere we want to actually rely on and trust. And I think that's where we need to draw the boundaries.
Thank you. The next question, I think I would like to know the answer to this question as well, which is, what is the biggest trend that you've been spotting in climate and defense, and have you invested in any new companies in that space? Anybody like to take this question?
I'd say probably one of the biggest trends that I've seen recently is a focus on nuclear, modular small nuclear reactors, which we'll be making investments in shortly, to be announced soon. But I'd say that's probably one of the biggest trends that I've seen. That is, I mean, it's necessary. You know, it's not a hype.
And from our side at Pale Blue Dot, we only invest in things we consider climate. So if it's, again, I think defense, if you think about climate resilience as defense, then definitely there's an overlap. And then you can look at grid security, for example, and grid resilience as something that we've been looking at. But in general, if anything is defense in terms of dual use, we won't touch it.
Thank you. I have a question for each of you, which I think this is going to be our last question. So someone has asked, what do you do on an individual level to contribute to fight climate change besides your everyday job? I'll start with you, Heidi.
What do I do on an individual level? I love this. When people are a bit like, oh, but you do
what about
fly
you?
Here. I'm like, oh, come on. On an individual level, I don't have a car. I only have an electric bike that I drive around my kids in. I pretty much only buy secondhand clothes because I think it's amazing. I'm a vegetarian, but I do fly. I do a lot of the sins that other people do as well. But to be honest, I think the biggest impact that we can all have if we're going there is probably to think about our finances and think about our pensions. If we can put our savings and our pension and our 401ks, etc., into green into green transition, essentially, and actually take them away from oil and fossil fuel, then I think this is probably the greatest impact that we can have as individuals. And I have a lot of companies working in this space, so come talk to me if you're interested.
Thank you. Christian?
I think that last point that you made on the finances is really probably the most impact that you can have as an individual. And it's trackable. You know, there's KPIs to it. Personally, I have a car in California that when I visit family, you know, once every couple of months. But I live in DC now and only take public transit for the most part. I am alongside a few other people starting a foundation that's very broad, targeting mental health and veteran suicide prevention and teen suicide and a whole bunch of different things. But one of the focuses that and programs that me and a few people have created is having the next generation of wealth inheritors, family offices, champion a cause on behalf of their family and something they can get passionate about. And some of those topic areas are go and clean plastics in the ocean, or go and build solar grids and things in India or different places, and have them see what the real world is like, you know, and not live in their little bubble, and kind of open their minds to then allow them to experience that and then target their finances and investments in a way that aligns with their values.
Thank you. And John?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that good. I excuse a lot of behavior with my work, so, but I try to eat less meat, and then a lot of of course, try to drive less car and the common stuff. But overall, I'm bad.
Great. Well, thank you so much for listening to us. And I'm sure any of our panelists would be happy to talk to you about the topics we've discussed today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.